Deep Purple were better than everybody else. I mean, it was
But
that
why?
simple.
But why?
But I mean, they were, you know, I went to my first Deep Purple concert in 1973, February 1973, Copenhagen, Denmark. There was a tennis tournament at KB Holland. It R.I.P. Unfortunately, as you know, burned down about 6 months ago. Um, but you know, there was a tennis tournament at KB Holland, and all the tennis players were invited to the Deep Purple show that took place on the Sunday before the tournament. And my father was given 4 tickets, and he went with a couple of the more edgier tennis players, and then they had a spare ticket, so I was dragged along. I was all of 9 years old, and I had no idea what I was getting dragged into. So Deep Purple come out, and you know, Ritchie Blackmore is throwing his guitar around and playing it with his foot, and Ian Gillan is screaming his head and his lungs out. Ian Pace is just back there, hidden behind hair and his glasses, and you know, playing without a shirt on and just sitting there, and it's just, you know, 2 hours of energy. John Lord is sort of holding the whole thing down with the keyboards, and Roger Glover is kind of doing the bass thing and kind of following Ritchie, following Ian, following John Lord, kind of being the anchor in the whole thing. And it blew my mind. I had never seen energy at that level. I'd never seen performance. I'd never seen personality. It was the biggest thing I'd ever seen. Do you know what I mean? It was so cool. And I remember Ritchie, I mean, clearly to this day, I still have, like, Ritchie was kind of holding the black and white Strat above his head and doing his whole kind of, you know, shtick with it, probably towards the end of Space Truckin', which is where he would let loose. But it just blew my head off. And I walked down to the local record store the next day and said Deep Purple, and they handed me a copy of Fireball. That was the only album that they had. So I started with Fireball, and then, you know, within, you know, days or weeks, you know, I would get the rest of the records. And, you know, Deep Purple stayed with me. You know, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Status Quo, The Sweet, Slade. I mean, maybe not Zeppelin so much, because they didn't come to Denmark, but Sabbath, well, especially Status Quo, Sweet, and Slade were all the other bands, you know, 74, 75, 76, but Deep Purple were in a different league for me. And they came back and played their first gig in Copenhagen with Coverdale and Hughes in December of 73, and I was there. And they came back on the final run with Ritchie in March of 75, I think, and played at Brøndby-Hallen, and I was there. That was when Elf were opening with Ronnie Dio. And so I was there. I saw Deep Purple 3 times between I was 9 and 11 years old, and it was pretty cool. But they always, you know, to me they were, you know, they had a different thing. You know, what, I mean, their records were their records. Great songs, you know, great sequencing, is great musicianship. But what's so interesting is, especially as a fan later nowadays, is that if you still, I've been listening to Paris 75 for the last 2 days in the car, is that every single live version, every single recording is different. So if you hear the 3 nights in Japan in August 72, you know, Strange Kind of Woman, Child of Time, whatever, they're all different from each other. Ritchie plays different solos. Ian sings different phrases. Ian Pace plays different drum fills. It's like, it's the coolest thing because you never know exactly what's coming next. And to me, that is one of the most missed things in rock and roll, is the thing about that it's about a moment up on stage and you don't know where it's going next. Ritchie would solo until he didn't want to solo anymore, and if you know what to look for, he'd turn around, he'd raise his right hand, he'd look over at Ian Pace, and then, you know, within 2 or 4 bars they would then go into the next part, but it would be his cue.
The States, Made in Japan was probably, you know, one of the highlights. You know, Highway Star, all the hits that kind of came through America were the ones that we got.
In the album, putting it on and hearing Highway Star and just thinking, oh my god, these guys really are as great as I think they are.
Love the fact that Deep Purple was able to merge and fuse different styles into their formula. Obviously classical was a huge, you know, signature in their transitions and in their song bodies, but they had a lot of funky moments as well. I mean, that was also huge. The bass playing on their stuff is incredible. I mean, Roger Glover's such a phenomenal player, and somewhat underrated. You know, it's like, you know, you hear about a lot of these other guys back then, but he was such a force and such a powerful player, multi-talented in his ability as a technician. Like, he could play incredibly well with his fingers, but he was great with a pick, and he had a really powerful sound.
Wow.
Blackmore to me was just always an amazing guitar player and somewhat of an enigma, because he didn't play like Eric Clapton or Jimmy Page or Jeff Beck or Hendrix or any of the guys I was listening to at the time. He had a bluesy feel to his playing, but his licks were just so unconventional that I was just attracted to it just immediately.
Talking about
Thing that these guys did that nobody else did at the time. You know, Zeppelin were much closer to a kind of a blues thing, you know, American blues thing. Sabbath at the time obviously were slow and heavy and had that kind of weight. But what Deep Purple had, I mean, if you listen to a song like Hard Lovin' Man from, you know, it was recorded in 1969, you know, on the Deep Purple and Rock album. I mean, it's one of the first songs to have like kind of continuous, kind of chunky, like down picking, which is all the stuff that Judas Priest did, you know, 10 years later, and then bands like ourselves and whatever became. But, you know, Ritchie Blackmore, 1969, Hard Lovin' Man, Highway Star, you know, even like Fireball, for instance. You know, the song Fireball, that's double bass. You know, it's one of the first songs to kind of do fast double bass. So all the stuff that we do and have been doing for the last 30 years, and you know, the bands in the 80s and 90s and last decade, I mean, it all traces back to Deep Purple, and obviously to a degree Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. But Purple had their own niche within that trio, and for what got my dick hard, they were doing the stuff that was, you know, kind of energetic heavy metal, which has kind of been the driving for sort of energetic up. You know, I was listening to from Paris, or earlier I was listening to Lay Down Stay Down, from Cal Jam in '74. I mean, it's playing like a super fast double time type of thing through the verses. You know, it's 1974. I mean, nobody was doing that type of stuff at the energy that these guys did it. So they're pioneers, these guys, you know.
so
That drives anyone to fucking Deep Purple. It's bum 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 boo doo 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 doo.
Everybody heard Smoke on the Water. That was the first song that I learned. I think that's the first song everybody learned, you know, was Smoke on the Water. Again, riffs, classic riffs, along with everything else that they did. And one of the best rhythm sections on the planet. You know, Zeppelin would have been, you know, the other end of that, the bookend of that in rock. But a Smoke on the Water, you know, absolutely is the classic riff.
I remember sitting down one time with my guitar thinking, I'm going to write a riff, or try to write a riff that's as instantly accessible as the riff on Smoke on the Water. And what happened? I came up with
Probably a deeper appreciation for it now than I did. Right now, Deep Purple is actually, you know, also my 13-year-old's favorite band. So there's a kind of a passing the torch thing that's really, really cool. And, you know, we sit and, you know, and we listen to the 3 different versions of Child in Time from, you know, Osaka and Tokyo in '72, and we compare the guitar solos. And, you know, this night, you know, Ian's playing a little faster and Ritchie is a little more cohesive this night. I mean, we sit and actually have those kind of conversations on the way to fucking 8th grade drop off at 7:45 in the a.m. out in the suburbs of San Francisco. That doesn't suck. That's much better than, you know, I don't know, you know, this week's, you know, fluffy pop star, you know what I mean? So that's worked out pretty well. So I do feel like I have a a deeper appreciation for the history of all of it than now that I get a chance to kind of pass it on also, to the next generation.